trouble with evolutionary theory often try and make it seem unappealing by correctly saying that evolution claims that we are descended from apes rather than created in God's image. Well, I prefer to know that I'm related to every other living thing on Earth. I am comforted by the overwhelming genetic evidence that every human being is very closely related, all of one species, and free of manipulation by intelligent design. We have made our own way over billions of years. We are a natural product. We owe nothing to a lord or creator. Instead, our only care is to sustain the environment that sustains us, and to avoid using our increasing abilities to snuff each other out. Religion is correct in fearing evolution. It is the best explanation for the complexity of life and both the bounty and the cruelty of our world. Darwin is the rival of the prophets. He has, with reason and objective natural evidence, done more than any other to free our minds from the reliance on the theistic theory of life. For this, we celebrate him today. I want to introduce today's speaker, who is Rob Richard. He is a longtime teacher and administrator at West Windsor-Plainsboro High School, or at the West Windsor-Plainsboro School District, and he is president of the Biology Teachers Association of New Jersey. He's also a visiting professor of science education at the College of New Jersey, out in Ewing, New Jersey. Beautiful campus, by the way. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Rob Richard.
Well, that was an interesting introduction by Eric. It makes me feel as though I'm going to be preaching to the choir. So, starting with this slide, this is a picture of a ground finch on San Cristobal Island. My wife and I were fortunate enough this past, actually January of 2014, to do a National Geographic expedition to the Galapagos, which I wish I had done before I started teaching biology rather than after I completed my career. So I'd like to do a presentation today that focuses on the challenges associated with teaching evolution in New Jersey public schools. And my presentation will center around three guiding questions. Why is teaching evolution important? What are some issues that exist regarding the teaching of evolution? And how should we teach evolution? But before we begin, we're going to take a brief poll. And the reason will become clear later on. How many of you have smartphones? Okay, it's enough. That's a good enough sample size. We're going to be using a service called polleverywhere.com. And what I'd like for you to do, I'm going to make the poll active from my phone. And what I'd like for you to do is to text, this is my nickname, RoboTeacher, to that number. So that's the number you text to, that's the message you text, and then you'll be given a choice of answering A or B for this first question. The first question, I'll read it out loud, is overuse of an antibiotic causes bacteria to mutate and develop resistance to the antibiotic. So if you'd like to take a few seconds to post your response. That's fine. That's fine. The reason I'm doing it this way is that it collects the data and we can show it as a group, but nonetheless, okay. So how many of you vote for A? How many vote for B? Okay, we've got one B, mostly A. Okay, would someone write that down for me somewhere? So, do you think it's true that overuse of an antibiotic causes bacteria to mutate and develop resistance? Yes. True A, again?
Yes. No.
True B, again? Okay, so we've got mostly A's, some B's. As an aside here, just for my sake, how many of you are either associated with science or do science, or scientists. Okay, very interesting. Okay, good. Another one. Life tends to evolve from the simple to the complex. Life tends to evolve from the simple to the complex. Show the hands for true. Hands for false. Okay, interesting. Okay. So again, mostly A, some B. Humans evolved from chimpanzees. Humans evolved from chimpanzees. True? This is interesting. The reason I like doing the anonymous poll is that it reduces what we call the herd effect. When we do this with students in class, for pre-assessments, for example, we want to turn off the data as it comes alive, so that kids don't wait for the smartest kid in the class to raise his hand and follow that person. So I just saw a couple of hands go up and down because there weren't a significant number. So let's do it again. Humans evolved from chimpanzees. True. A. False. Oh, interesting. We flipped that one around. Okay. Giraffes evolved long necks in order to browse on leaves in trees. True. False. Okay, so it's almost half and half. A little towards the false, but quite a few truths. Sustained indiscriminate use of an insecticide favors insects that happen to have resistance and leads to largely resistant populations. True. False. Okay, good. So we're going to go back to that at the end of the presentation, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that interfaces with science education. So why is teaching evolution important? Now this is a quotation from a scientist, I think he's Hungarian, Theodosius Dobzhansky from 1973. Very important statement. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. So by this we mean that when we look, for example, at molecular genetics, DNA, all critters share the same genetic code, ATGC. It works pretty much the same way. We could take human genes, stick them in bacteria, and the bacteria will express the human genes. And this repeats itself in lots of different areas of biology. And as a biology teacher, one thing that I would do quite often is, as we went through the curriculum, point out where evolution interacts with the content. So in other words, Darwin's big idea is the tie that binds all of biology together. And from my perspective as a biology teacher, it is the single most important idea in biology. By the way, all the background pictures I took while I was in the Galapagos. That's a blue-footed booby. Why is teaching evolution important? Well, in addition to what Dobzhansky said, evolution is one of the central big ideas in the next generation science standards. Any of you here familiar with next generation science standards? No, one of you. Okay. Are you a teacher?
Yes.
Oh, that's why. Okay. Where do you teach?
For Township High School.
Okay. The next generation science standards have been adopted by the state of New Jersey as our science standards. They adopted them effective 2014, but school districts have about a 2.5-year window from the time of adoption to the time of implementation. Point being that ultimately all of the students that attend New Jersey public schools will be held accountable for understanding evolution as a big idea in science. So it's part of what we do in New Jersey. And consequently, as teachers, we are required to teach the state standards. It's law. Districts have to align their curricula with the state standards, and we as teachers must teach them. So here's an example of the language from the next generation science standards. Students will be held accountable for understanding evolution in the following way. They need to be able to construct an explanation based on evidence that the process of evolution primarily results from 4 factors. And then it goes on to delineate those factors, which are basically the factors that Darwin articulated when he proposed natural selection as the causative agent of evolution. And there's a link. We don't have Wi-Fi, so I can't take you there. But yes, you can go to the Next Generation website and see what Next Generation science standards really look like. A few years back, when the Next Gen science standards came out, New Jersey embarked on an effort to create model curricula based on the Next Generation science standards, so that districts could adopt this model curriculum as their curriculum without having to do much in the way of revising the curriculum that they already have in place. And when you take a look at the New Jersey model curriculum for biology, one entire unit, and there's a total of 6 units in the curriculum, Unit 5 focuses entirely on natural selection and evolution. And there's the link. And people tend to hold many misconceptions about science in general and about evolution specifically. The little poll we took at the beginning targets some of these ideas that are commonly held as misconceptions. Like I said, we'll talk about them again towards the end of the presentation. And as science teachers, we need to overtly address misconceptions in science and try to get students to change their perspective on how the world works. And the same thing is true for evolution. Oops, I'm going to go back to that one. So this is a common misconception. You see this picture sometimes, and the problem with this is that these 3 in the middle are extinct. So these 2 and this one are currently extant species. This is a human being, that's a chimp, and that's I think it's a spider monkey. But what this picture implies is that spider monkeys gave rise to chimps, which gave rise to Australopithecus, to Homo erectus, to another species of the hominid, and eventually Homo sapiens. And whereas this is probably true, there's no way that these 2 living species gave rise to extinct species. But yet, people look at this and say, oh yeah, that's true. And of course, as science teachers, we run into common issues associated with teaching evolution. One of the things that you hear anti-evolutionists say, oh, evolution is just a theory. And this points to the misunderstanding of the word theory. In the vernacular, the theory quite often means just a guess. And people say, I have a theory about that, when they're really saying, I don't know anything about it, but I'm guessing. In science, a theory is the highest level of understanding that we can develop. In other words, it represents the best possible explanation given the best possible evidence. Things change. As evidence changes, we can change theories. Other theories other than evolution, theory of the atom, theory of gravitation, theory of relativity. For some reason, anti-evolutionists have no problem with those theories, but when it comes to evolution, it's just a theory. So again, this is a science education problem, because if we get students to understand how we know what we know, i.e. how science is done, and if we teach evolution as a science, it helps get around this issue. You've heard this, right? Teach the controversy, as if to imply that there are two sides to the story and they have equal gravity, and they don't. Teach both sides of the controversy and let kids decide. And then, of course, the one that I guess in this audience especially is going to create some humor. If we teach evolution, it will lead to godlessness, humanism, and the decline of civilization. I would argue that yeah, it may lead to humanism, but it's a good thing. And if you've been aware of what happens in different states around the country, there have been multiple attempts made by states' Board of Educations to either reduce the amount of evolution being taught, to water it down, or even to outright exclude it. Currently, Texas is still engaged in issues with trying to include language of intelligent design into the state standards. Louisiana, it seems to be an annual issue there. Pennsylvania had an issue about 10 years ago where they tried to, one particular township tried to include intelligent design as part of the science curriculum. And many of them approach it from the perspective of that we have to give equal time to scientific creationism or intelligent design. I find this term kind of interesting because it's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? You can't try to explain things supernaturally and then call it scientific. So, from the perspective of science education, we need to approach evolution as no different than any other part of science. If we teach science as a set of known facts that kids have to memorize and then regurgitate on tests, we do a disservice to the children, because then they don't really get to understand how science works, that science isn't a set of facts that we need to memorize, but that science is a way of knowing, that science is a way of how we go about understanding how the world works. It's the process of science that we're interested in, and that science works on evidence, and we make inferences from the evidence. We've already talked about this, what it means to be a theory, and I always tell the students that I'm training right now at the College of New Jersey, I'm involved in a science teacher training program. I always tell my students that we have, as science teachers, we have a mission, and the mission is science literacy. And one of the things that we need to do as teachers of science is we need to get students to really understand the notion of theory. If we get that much done, then the notion that evolution is a problem won't be as big. Okay, so how do we go about teaching evolution? I've got some ideas. These ideas have been implemented in classrooms, and they work. So for example, instead of having students just read about evolution or watch movies about evolution or have lectures on evolution, students need to work with actual critters. So I have seen a lesson, for example, where students are given an assemblage of different kinds of preserved insects. And insects are kind of cool to work with because you really don't have to do much to them. You stick a pin through them, let them dry out, and you've got this beautiful exoskeleton that still remains behind. So students can make observations on the structural adaptations that the insect still exhibits, even though it's dead. And they can develop evidence-based explanations for the relationship between the structure and function. So we can ask questions like, why does a butterfly have a very long, thin proboscis? Why does a grasshopper have these long, thin legs with large, developed hind legs? And we can develop arguments from evidence as to the relatedness between the species. So if you take, for example, have a student look at a butterfly and at a moth, they can see that there are similarities between them, and that these similarities imply relatedness. This is an interesting picture, by the way. This is taken on the island of Daphne Minor, and there's the island of Daphne Major. And the reason I took this picture is that it's good background for an example of how we can use real-world case studies to demonstrate that evolution actually occurs in real time. Any of you familiar with the work done by Peter and Rosemary Grant? Yeah, a book was published not too long, well, quite a while ago. Beak of the Finch, have you read it? Great book, huh? Yeah. So Beak of the Finch was a story about Peter and Rosemary Grant, Princeton scientists, Princeton University scientists, who spent, 20 years or something like that on this island, accounting for every finch on that island. every finch was documented over time, and every aspect of the finch was documented. How much it weighed, how big its beak was, both in depth and in length. What's the difference between the genders, male and female, and the different kinds. What they found was that based on selection pressure, mostly from climate, so years of drought would cause a shift in the morphological distribution. El Nino years change things dramatically. But the bottom line is that if you look at the data from Peter and Rosemary Grant, you can actually see that speciation was taking place in real time. There's other examples that, and you could go online and get tons of different examples that students can work with. There's a bird in Central Europe called the blackcap. Seems to be two populations that are diverging from one another. One population migrates to Africa for the winter, the other population stays because in places like Great Britain, there's an enormous number of bird feeders. There's no reason for the birds to migrate. So the population that stays and the population that still migrates, they've been diverging from one another genetically to the point where they might actually become separate species before too long. This is a great example too. This is a salamander species called Encetina or this is a genus actually, genus Encetina, that originated in Northern California and migrated along the west and the east side of the mountains down to the south. And as the species migrated, became subspecies until they rejoined in Southern California. And even though all the subspecies can breed back with one another, going back to the original species, at the end of both chains, the two species can't breed with one another anymore. So they've diverged from one another genetically, and this has occurred in the last, I forget how many hundreds of years, but in terms of evolution, that's very, very recent. I think the most persuasive evidence for students being able to make sense of evolution comes from molecular studies, studies of DNA and proteins. And students can actually work with this in many different ways. We can ask questions about relatedness and related to actual cases wherein paternity or maternity has to be proven. Nowadays in courts of law, DNA evidence is accepted. So we can provide sample evidence for a case and have students create a family tree from the evidence if need be. And students seem to have no problem accepting the validity of the science here. In fact, no one does. It's used as proof in courts of law. So for example, here's a sample DNA evidence from a paternity case. These black bands, and some of them are very, very faint. With this particular projector you really can't see. But the M here stands for mother, the C for child, F1 and F2, two potential fathers. Okay? These black bands are pieces of DNA that have been created through sampling the DNA from the person in question. And we do the sampling usually by taking a cheek swab, and then the DNA is popped out of the cells, and the DNA is amplified using a process called polymerase chain reaction. And then the DNA is cut with enzymes, and the enzymes cut the DNA at particular spots along the way, and then create bands of different sizes. So the bands up here represent DNA molecules, or pieces of the molecule, that are fairly large, and down here they're fairly small. Point being that this mother and this child share an enormous number of similar DNA pieces. Why? Because the child is genetically related to the mother. So if the question arises, which one of these two is the father, we can take a look at the bands that the child has that are not present in the mother and ask, well, where do they come from? We can see here, in fact, I think I've got a couple labeled. There are two bands that correspond only with one of the putative fathers. So we can see that father number 2 is the dad. So students can do this with sample data, no problem. But then we can extend this. We can say individuals who are closely related share common DNA bands. And if we extend this across generations, people very easily accept that there's more similarities between siblings than between cousins, for example, right? Makes sense. We would expect more similarities between cousins than we would between more distantly related individuals. We can do the same thing between species. So we can ask the question, who's related to whom? We can gather DNA or protein sequence data for different species, and we can create family trees. And the question then is, how is this any different from the family tree we create using data from relatedness between members of a family? Well, it really isn't. It's just using DNA to determine relatedness. So students can actually get DNA and protein sequences online. They can data mine databases such as GenBank, and they can download the DNA or protein sequence data. The difference between DNA sequence and protein sequence is that DNA, it's ATGC, sequence of bases, and protein, it's a sequence of the 20 amino acids that make up protein. Then the students can gather the sequence data for a given gene or protein. And one that I used to use with my students, very popular, is cytochrome C. Reason being that every living creature on Earth has to have this protein. Without cytochrome C, you can't effectively take food energy and make useful cell-level energy. So cytochrome C is kind of critical for life. But because it's critical for life, cytochrome C tends to be what we call evolutionarily conserved. There's not that many differences between one cytochrome C and another. So it makes for a great target molecule that we can study to determine relatedness or differences between species. After students get the sequences from GenBank or another database, they can align them, and from the alignment they can create a family tree. So here's a little family tree down here of different species of animals, from sponges to humans. Oh, sorry, that's not the button I wanted to press. There we go. So students can make predictions regarding which species might be closely related. So you can give the students a series of species to look at. And it can be as diverse as a yeast, fruit fly, fish, and then a bunch of vertebrates. You can throw in plants if you like. Or you can just leave it to the point where you're talking only about vertebrate species. It really doesn't matter. Then the students create family trees based on the best alignment data from the DNA or protein study, and they compare the tree results. In other words, they compare what they predicted versus what actually comes out from the data. So here's a sample download from GenBank of DNA data. So this is a sequence of A's, T's, G's, and C's for human for cytochrome C. This is for a chimpanzee for cytochrome C, and this is for a mouse for cytochrome C. And it's very boring reading. But if you're very careful about going down the line here and comparing this sequence to this one, it's identical. We're 100% the same. Cytochrome C from a chimp, cytochrome C from a human being, doesn't matter. Get to the mouse, and if you're careful enough, you can start looking for differences. I won't bother doing it with you because my eyes are old. Trust me, there are differences. So it's hard doing this by, just looking at it. We use computers to do the alignments for us. They're pretty good at it. Here's the same type of data, but this is a shortened version of the overall protein for cytochrome C. We've got here the first 50 to 60 amino acids. And the amino acids are listed by letter. So V is for valine, G is for glutamine, and so on and so forth. So each of these letters represents an amino acid. So if we take a look at the first line is for human beings, right here. And then the second line is for a rhesus monkey, then a horse, and so on and so forth. All the blue ones are highly conserved amino acids. That is, every critter here has that amino acid the same. But if we take a look at some of these, so for example, this one, you can see that it's the same for all the species here, except when you get down here to the fungi. You see that the Q has been replaced by an E, an L, and an E respectively. So that tells you that this particular set of amino acid isn't as critical for the function of the whole molecule. But certainly, you can infer from this by looking at which amino acids are, or the degree to which amino acids are similar, that human beings are more closely related to rhesus monkeys than we are to horses. All right. So students can make these things called cladograms. Cladograms are family trees, fancy word for family trees. And we can make these, and this is the predicting part. We can take a look at physical features and get an idea of how these features help us to differentiate who's related to whom. So all of these creatures belong in the phylum Chordata, meaning that they're all chordates. We all have a dorsal nerve cord and a notochord. But lamprey eels differ from tuna in that they don't have paired appendages. Lampreys don't have any legs or fins or anything like that. And they're they lack a spinal column. They have a dorsal nerve cord, but it's not wrapped in bone. You get to a tuna, and the dorsal nerve cord is wrapped in a vertebral column. So all the creatures from this point up have paired appendages and a spinal column. Here we have paired legs. Tuna don't have legs, but bullfrogs do. Everything from here on up has paired legs. Amniotic egg. Bullfrogs lay eggs, but they're not amniotic. Turtles do, however. Mammary gland separates the mammals from the rest over here. A kangaroo is not a placental, but these two are. And then the difference between a human and a rhesus monkey has to do primarily with the features associated with the brain case and the teeth. So this is a cladogram or family tree based on physical features. Then we can do the same thing with amino acid differences in cytochrome C. So we can see humans and rhesus monkeys, only one difference, so they're very closely related. Humans and kangaroo, 10 differences. Humans and snapping turtles, 15 differences, and so on and so forth. So the point of all this is that understanding evolution is no different than understanding science. Kids need to learn science by doing science. Otherwise, they're just learning about science. And kids need to, need to learn evolution also by doing science. So having kids work with data, having kids make inferences, having kids make predictions is no different in learning evolution than it is in learning the rest of what we teach them as far as science is concerned. Oh, this is a nice picture. This is my wife and I at the Darwin station in the Galapagos where they do research. So evolution is simply observations. Species have evolved. You look at the fossil record, there were species that existed that are now extinct. So evolution really, in this case, is not a theory, it's just a set of facts. How evolution has occurred is the theory. And as far as I'm concerned, and you look at the data, the best way to explain evolution is natural selection. So when we say evolution is a theory, what we really need to do is complete that thought. Evolution is actually, the theory is the theory of evolution by natural selection. And the guy we have to thank for that is Mr. Darwin. This, because of the way it's worded, is false. Because what this means to imply is that the mutation is caused by the antibiotic. Can't happen. The mutations have to already exist in the population in order for the antibiotic to select for the mutation for resistance. So unless the bacteria have the genes already in their population, the antibiotic can't choose the ones that are resistant. The resistance has to be there. So no, the antibiotic doesn't cause the mutation, but so another thing you could do here is have students now rephrase this. How would you rephrase this so that it is in line with the idea of natural selection? Any ideas? So you have to have, so looking at natural selection, right, we have to have, the bacteria have to reproduce. That's the first big idea under natural selection. Number two, there has to be an existing variation that is heritable. Number three, there has to be competition. And number four, there has to be selection. So with the antibiotic present, those bacteria that have the gene for resistance will selectively outcompete those that are susceptible to the antibiotic. Yes?
Is that how some people did not get the Black Plague? Because they had other...
Correct. So there is inherent in the human population genetic diversity that will bestow on some individuals selective resistance to certain infectious diseases. Right. So the question was, do we also teach the students about gene pools and variations in genes called alleles? And the answer is yes. And what you just pointed out is this wonderful notion of Dobzhansky that evolution is the tie that binds. So if we teach genetics, we can't teach genetics as an isolated set of ideas, because that makes no sense unless you talk about how these alleles confer a selective advantage for one versus the other. So yes, we definitely have an intersection between genetics and evolution. Okay, the second one was, life tends to evolve from the simple to the complex. If that's true, then why do we still have simple life around us? Complexity, the problem with that statement is that it gives a mistaken impression that evolution is an arrow, that it continually goes from simple to complex. We want our students to look at evolution more as a branching bush where the species that are currently alive are at the tips of branches, but if you look back, the branches connect. This is true. Oops, pointing to nothing here, isn't that great? It is true to a degree if you think about that way, way back, there were only bacteria, and now there's a lot of other critters around. But the problem with that statement is that it gives a mistaken impression that there's a driving force that continually drives evolution forward towards complexity. But again, the point to a poll like this when I do it with students is not that there's a really one answer that's correct all the time, one answer that's false all the time, but then we start talking about what do we mean by this and how does this lead to conversations about how evolution really works. Okay, next question. Humans evolved from chimpanzees. No. Yes, sir.
Humans and chimpanzees both share a common ancestor.
Good. Yeah, we have a common ancestor that lived probably about 7 million years ago, but we are not evolved from chimpanzees. Any other questions or comments?
Well, there used to be a question about a missing link.
Missing link? Yeah, that's
Primates and the humans.
that's a difficult concept. There's missing. If you want to talk about missing links, there's missing links everywhere, so to speak, and there's no missing links at all. Keep in mind that we can only work with the data we currently have, and the data we have available to us from the fossil record, from homologies, from embryology, from molecular genetics, tells us that we are related somewhere back in time.
I have another question.
Sure.
We had Neanderthals people,
Yeah.
and they actually interbred with humans, according to something I saw on television.
Yeah.
What is the difference between a Neanderthal person, pure Neanderthal, and pure Homo sapiens?
Well, my understanding here is limited, but this is what I understand to be the case. Neanderthals lived contemporaneously with Homo sapiens, or primitive Homo sapiens in Europe, and that there was crossbreeding. Neanderthals differed from Homo sapiens in that there were significant skeletal features that were different. The skeletons of Neanderthals look different. There's a brow ridge. The cranial capacity is larger. They tended to be shorter in stature and more robust in their musculoskeletal structure. So there were differences that you can see. There may also have been differences in their societies that can be inferred from traces left behind from their campsites and the vestiges of their life left behind in places that have been unearthed by paleontologists. But again, going back to how do we do science here, we have to look at the data, we have to look at what's available to us, and we make inferences from that.
And so, like in New Jersey, we don't tend to have the kind of school boards that want to inject intelligent design into the curriculum. But what I've heard from some members of some school boards and from some teachers, not necessarily biology teachers, but is that evolution tends to get glossed over because they're afraid of lawsuits from parents who might object to the teaching of evolution. I want you to comment, if you can, on how much that happens.
Yeah, there is that. There's a lot of factors at play here. First of all, if a parent has an objection to their child being exposed to the teaching of evolution, whether or not the teacher is supported moving forward with teaching evolution depends by and large on the degree to which the administrator has a spine. Okay? Now, and we're human beings. I've been an administrator as well. If the administrator is not tenured in the district, the administrator will try to mollify, will try to play both sides and make the problem go away. As an administrator at Westminster Plainsboro, I only had one time where there was an issue with a parent voicing concern over their kid being exposed to evolution. And my reply to them was, I'm sorry, we teach science, we don't teach religion in science class. Your perspective is a religious perspective, and I can appreciate that. But we cannot test religious concepts using the scientific method. We can only look at data and make inferences from data, and that's what our students are going to be doing. So we still need to hold your child accountable for mastering this content and these concepts. If you choose to withhold your child from these lessons, or if you tell your child, don't answer those questions on the test or something like that, that's your choice. But your child will be held to the same level of accountability as all the other children in the class. So that has always been my approach. As a teacher of teachers at the College of New Jersey, I still keep in touch with the science teachers I've trained. And one of my students who went on to become a teacher, in his first year as a science teacher, encountered this issue. Unfortunately, he was teaching in a district where the administrators right directly above him were not tenured, and they just told him, excuse the kid, which I think is criminal.
Is there a difference between late Homo sapiens and modern humans today?
Probably. I don't know. This is not my area of expertise, content-wise, but my understanding is that human beings have expressed significant differences in their features as the fossil record supports. So if we take a look at Homo erectus, Homo habilis, their physical skeletal features are different from those of Homo sapiens. Is there a difference between ancient Homo sapiens, that is the Homo sapiens that lived in Europe alongside Neanderthals? Now, if you cleaned them up, gave them a shave, and put them in a suit, you probably couldn't tell the difference. Okay?
Could you please give me a simple definition of evolution I can tell my 8th grader?
Evolution is the observations that we have made regarding how life has existed on Earth. In other words, that species that are currently alive are different from species that were alive in the past. How we get from one set of species to another is natural selection. But the observation that there were dinosaurs and there are no longer dinosaurs, that's evolution.
I have a question, which is about the theory of evolution, which it seems to me the data supports. But science moves ahead,
Right.
and evolution doesn't support yet certain aspects of at least human existence, or consciousness, let's say. Let me just give that for instance.
Okay.
Do you feel that eventually this theory is going to explain that, and or other theories, I'm not talking about religion now, other theories are going to come and subsume evolution, the theory of evolution, and include it, and therefore explain some of these things which it's hard to see that evolution itself can explain?
I think it's the other way around. I think that evolution and natural selection will eventually be able to explain, for example, the evolution, for lack of a better term, of consciousness in human beings. I was involved as a teacher with a program up at Rutgers University at the Waxman Institute called the Waxman Student Scholars Program, where we took some of our students and trained them in doing molecular genetics in the summertime, and then during the school year, those students would lead student research at the home schools, and go back to Rutgers and share ideas. One year we focused on primates and trying to find genes that could help us to understand intelligence, consciousness. So we didn't get very far, but it was very, very interesting to have the students try to isolate genes that would have perhaps an impact in intelligence from studying other organisms. So we isolated DNA from C. elegans, from yeast, from other places, and looked for sequences that could overlap with human sequences that have already been shown to be involved in the evolution or development, I should say, of the nervous system.
Okay.
So that's where we start with. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's an old saying in biology, I understand, that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny.
Phylogeny.
To the extent that that's true, how would you explain that on a genetic basis?
Well, the ontogenic and phylogenic.
Define those, please.
Okay, sorry. Ontogeny is the development of a critter from embryo to adult. Okay, so from fertilized egg, I should say, to independent individual. Phylogeny is the evolutionary history of the species. So if you take a look at the phylogeny of, let's say, human beings, we are, and this is where the problem of evolution as an arrow comes into play. Because if we start thinking about our phylogenetic history, we see in our bodies evidence of species that are only distantly related to us. If you really want to get into this, I recommend Neil Shubin's book, Your Inner Fish. Very good. Which, we're basically fish, okay? If you take it all the way back, a lot of what we have in our bodies is very, very fish-like, although it's obviously different as well. But, so that's phylogeny. Ontogeny, if you take a look at how a human embryo develops, there seem to be, in the steps of embryological development stages where we look a lot like the embryos of a fish, then we look a lot like the embryo of a frog, of a reptile, of a bird, and so on and so forth. And somebody once said that ontogeny, that is the development from embryo up, is reflective of our evolutionary history. Okay? And it's kind of interesting to think about that there seems to be this correlation. But again, we and currently existing species of vertebrates share a common ancestor. So it is difficult for us to claim that we evolved from a trout. We didn't, because trout live today and we live today. But if we go back far enough in time to the first evolution of the teleost fish, yeah, we share some similarities with those.
I know my question is, I know it's way too soon on an evolutionary time scale to really have an answer. But in terms of time, evolution's arrow forward, do you have any thoughts about the influence of climate, our climate problems on our evolution as a species?
Yeah, so climate change is happening. I mean, this is another area where, if we teach science well, that the notion that climate isn't changing doesn't become an issue anymore, because it's just data. So the world climate is changing, the world is warming. How is this impacting species? The species are already voting. They're voting with their feet, they're moving, right? So we now have species that are capable of living farther north on the East Coast than they used to in the past, because our winters, or we believe that this winter, have been milder. Species have been migrating. There's studies done with, I forget which one it was. I can't cite the actual study, but there are studies that show that species are already migrating in response to pressures brought to bear by global warming. And there are species that they can't migrate. Can they evolve fast enough to adapt? The changes are happening very, very quickly, so it might mean, and again, this is conjecture, the demise of many species, that we will lose species diversity. As a corollary to that, we do have evidence to show that we lived during the time of human history on Earth, which is very, very brief, by the way, compared to the history of life on Earth. I used to do an exercise with my students where we would use the hallway of the science wing to put up a timeline of history of life on Earth, and the kids all had to put on the timeline an event. And the hallway was about 200 meters there and back again to my room. And on that scale, all of human history fit into the last bit of mortar before the end of the hallway. And the dinosaurs only appeared at the bathroom a couple of yards down a ways. But the point being that human beings have been here such a short period of time, and we had such a tremendous impact on the physical setting of the planet. We've driven more species into extinction in the history of life on Earth than at any other time.
I have a question. What would your response be to somebody who says to you, well, we're human beings. We don't need our pinky fingers anymore, so we're going to evolve into a species without pinky fingers. What would you say to somebody who comes to you and says that?
Okay, so I'd say let's apply the principles of natural selection. What is the selection pressure that would drive a population towards losing a particular feature? Well, we do have case histories of, for example, eyeless or blind salamanders living in caves. It costs a lot of energy for an organism to produce eyes and make these eyes work. So the explanation there is that in the past, salamanders that were isolated in caves, those that didn't have to spend the capital to produce eyes had an advantage over those that did, and over geologic time, selection pressure was for eyelessness, or at least loss of vision. What is the selection pressure for us to lose our pinkies? There isn't any. There isn't any.
It's been a long time since I've been through grade school and high school in New Jersey.
Me too. I feel I've lived with them for 36 years now.
So my question is, you've talked in general about teaching students, but clearly in first, second grade you teach different things from what you teach juniors and seniors.
Correct.
Can you give us a sense of when you start introducing these concepts and how they evolve as students progress through the system?
Very good. So if we take a look at the state science standards and the next generation science standards, we see a very clearly articulated sequence of what we expect students to be able to know and do at the different grade levels. Children, let's say in second grade, are very, very curious. Children are actually natural scientists. They don't come into looking at things with a prejudice. But getting children to start looking at things objectively really, really helps. So a second grader can be given a living thing to start observing and start wondering about. A second grader can make observations on the differences between, let's say, a turtle and a frog. So that's how you start. And every grade level has different learning objectives associated with where we expect our students to develop those understandings. And they build on one another. One of the things that I'm always intrigued with is little kids are so intrinsically curious about the way the world works. They love science, and somewhere around middle school, we drum it out of them. And then when you get to high school, you know, they're going into these little compartmentals of chemistry and biology and physics, and many of them get even more turned off to science. You're actually speaking to a larger issue, and that is, how do we keep kids interested in science all the way through? By the time kids get to take physics, you know how many people actually graduate from high school with physics? It's ridiculously small.
Here's one.
Here's one. How many of you have had physics? Yes!
I have sometimes met people who are anti-Darwinian evolutionists. And one of the questions that they posed me, which is similar to what you said, well, can you have something evolving from a more complex to a simpler organism? And I wasn't able to give them an example. He said, could you, under any circumstances, imagine that an elephant would become a single-celled being? And I said, well, the conditions have been changing in the last few billion years, you know, hundreds of millions of years, but that did not satisfy him.
Okay, let me go back to the one example I mentioned before with regard to the cave salamanders. Eyes are very complex. They're tremendously complex structures that require an enormous amount of energy to make and to keep going. Salamanders that don't have eyes have lost this ability because it's cheaper on an energy perspective. So there you got an example of salamanders living outside of caves that have these complex structures, whereas the ones in the caves don't. They have evolved from complex to less complex.
I was pleasantly surprised to hear about New Jersey having such a strong mandate for teaching evolution, and I'm completely unaware of that. I don't have kids in school or anything, so there was no publicity surrounding that coming through. Was there a controversy in getting that established in New Jersey?
No.
Great.
However, in other states, yes.
In science fiction, I think of a movie back in the 50s where these creatures came from outer space. And the main creature, the driving creature, was like brain with no body.
Right.
forget the name of the movie. And that's throughout science fiction, there's been stuff like that. Now, for millions of years, we had to use our bodies every day for most of the day. Now, people going against our history are sitting, not using their body. Would it be conceivable that for hundreds of generations going forward, that we don't need our bodies the way we once did, and would evolution possibly change us in that regard?
Okay, so I'm going to throw I know how I would answer this. I'm curious to see whether any of you can put together a cogent explanation based on what we just talked about with, see I'm playing a teacher now, right? Regarding natural selection and how it works, to answer this gentleman's question.
I would say that it's unlikely to happen on an evolutionary basis because, like you said before, there's no selection pressure for us to lose our bodies. However, a transhumanist might say that we might adopt an artificial body and transplant our minds into an AI kind of consciousness, so we would live in machines without a human body.
Yeah, that's an interesting aside in that there's concern over can natural selection and evolution work on artificial intelligence? Will machines eventually evolve by selecting for particular things? But that's a great question.
It seems to me, is this?
It should be.
It seems to me that we're not even subject to evolution anymore. I mean, human beings, because of advances in medicine and the like. For example, diabetes is becoming more and more common. People with weak eyes are suffering no real pressure not to have weak eyes, so weak eyes gets passed on, where historically in a natural environment, those things might have been selected against, and we're just not being selected that way anymore. Now people are selected for marriage and reproduction based on how much money they make and where they grew up and who knows what. But are we off the track altogether now?
Again, you're using the correct, in my estimation, you're using the correct language, and that is asking questions, and this is what I expect my students to be able to do. Ask questions about what is the selection pressure? How does the selection pressure impact generations of the species moving forward? So, if there is no selection pressure for particular adaptation, then the species pretty much stays status quo. A while back, I guess in the 70s, there were two scientists, Niles Eldridge and Stephen Jay Gould, who published an idea called punctuated equilibrium. Any of you heard of that? Wow, this is incredible. Why you guys never heard of punctuated? There's a bumper sticker I saw once that says, "Honk if you understand punctuated equilibrium." My honk, and the guy goes, "Whoa!" Punctuated equilibrium, in a nutshell, states that species tend to stay pretty much steadily the same for long chunks of time unless there is selection pressure. And this selection pressure can change a species very quickly. By quickly, we're talking about thousands of years. So, and Gould did studies on snails, I believe, that showed that assemblages of snail shells over geologic time stayed the same until there was something in the environment that shook things up rapidly, and there was a rapid evolution and then followed by stasis. So it's stasis, dynamic evolution, stasis. The problem is, that part of the dynamic evolution, in terms of evolutionary time, it's tiny. In terms of human time, it's huge, considering that modern human beings probably have been around only for 250,000 years.
Just trying to build a little bit on what Ron was saying here. It's my understanding that a species remains the same for long periods, not because it doesn't have selection pressure acting on it,
right,
but because the selection pressures are maybe quite pressing, but they are continuous, they are unchanging. And so when a selection pressure is removed, you shouldn't necessarily expect that things will remain the same. You should expect them to sort of arbitrarily drift and achieve greater genetic diversity And so if everybody has glasses available and can still function with glasses, you should expect that over generations, people's eyes will deteriorate in all sorts of interesting ways. And there still will be people with good eyesight, but there'll be fewer and fewer over time if we can correct for it and it doesn't do the individual any harm in their ability to have children.
I would also argue that the sustaining of this great genetic diversity by artificial means is a good thing for humankind because our gene pool stays deep and wide.
And ready for anything.
And ready for anything.
With those New Jersey standards you mentioned, do the kids that get homeschooled have to also learn those things? And how about kids, maybe Catholic schools do, but how about, the more importantly now, how about the kids in the yeshivas? Are they required to learn those things about evolution and natural selection? As they should, and who's checking on that they are indeed learning these things?
The short answer to your question is no. The New Jersey standards can only be implemented in New Jersey public schools. Private schools, religious schools, and homeschoolers are not beholden to New Jersey state law regarding curriculum standards. I am not a big fan of standardized testing. I think it's wasting a lot of our time. We could be doing instruction instead. In New Jersey, at the high school level, there's currently only one standard test, and that's the biology competency test, BCT. It's implemented usually in May. Every student in the state of New Jersey has to take at least biology. It's the most commonly one taken, which is why the state targeted it under No Child Left Behind. There's a test in May. Kids have to take it. The test is aligned with the New Jersey curriculum standards. Unfortunately, it's a paper tiger. The kids don't have to pass it. They just have to take it. So there's lots of issues like that which make public education very complex and sometimes very, very frustrating. But to go back to what you said before, nobody in a Catholic school has to take that BCT. Nobody at a private school has to take that BCT. So we don't know. You know, people often claim, oh, Catholic schools, but they're so much better than public schools. It's just not true. If you as a school can select which kids go there, then your sample size will cluster around better and brighter kids, so to speak, so your test results are going to be better. But I would say that we don't really know until they take the same tests our kids do.
When I get antibiotics from a doctor, I'm told that I should finish the entire course, and it's implied that if I don't, that I'll be contributing to antibacterial resistance. Can you explain how that would work? I don't see how.
Yes, very good. Okay, it's related to dosage. So I used to do this with my students to demonstrate how this works. We would take innocuous bacteria you can play with every day. There's one called Bacillus megaterium. It's a soil bacterium. And you can grow it up on nutrient agar, which is the jelly that sustains the growth of bacteria. When you go get a throat swab at the doctor to see if you got strep throat, they take it to the lab, they swab it out, and they grow it. Now they have rapid strep tests. Back in the bad old days, you had to wait 24 hours to get results on whether you get strep or not. So the jelly that they grow the bacteria on is called nutrient agar. So my students would grow these bacteria on nutrient agar, but we would take small paper discs that were soaked in particular antibiotics of choice, tetracycline, streptomycin, et cetera, et cetera. Now, when you do that, you get, if the bacteria are susceptible, that is, if the antibiotic can kill them, you get what's called a zone of inhibition around the disc, where the bacteria won't grow. Just clear, because the chemical is slowly leaching out into the jelly, and the bacteria are in that area are killed. However, right on the edge between clear and lots of growth, you see a couple of colonies beginning to grow. Those are somewhat resistant types. If you choose those and grow them up in a culture that contains the same disc again, over 3-4 generations, you can make that ring disappear, and the bacteria will be, as a
whole population not susceptible to the antibiotic anymore. So it's a dosage thing. If you don't finish your antibiotic regimen, you can be inadvertently selecting for those bacteria that are somewhat susceptible, and then they will have an advantage the next time that you use that same antibiotic, because you're inadvertently selecting for resistance.
This might be slightly off topic, but do you have anything to say about the anti-vaxxer controversy going on?
That's a great question. I watched, one of my favorite shows on HBO is Bill Maher. I don't know how many of you guys watch it.
Everybody.
But this Friday evening episode, I was so irritated with him because he was approaching the conversation about vaccination from a non-scientific perspective. Vaccines, look at it from the science perspective. How do vaccines work? Vaccines challenge the immune system as though you got sick. You don't have to get sick. Now you've got these antibodies running around your body that give you immunity. And he was saying things like, well, it's not like getting the disease. It's better to be, to have your immune system actually have the disease. No, it's not. You don't want to get this disease. You want to be immune by getting the vaccine. So it goes back to the same thing that I've been talking about, and that is, how do we know what we know? How do we do science? Let's stick with observations and inferences from observations. And if you do that, then the anti-vaccine hysteria hopefully won't be as profound.
I mean, since you brought up the Bill Maher show, I was curious at that, but also one of the women said that there was scientific proof that prayer helped people. Did you hear that part? Help people get better, and that she went on, and it was interesting because the conservative and the liberal kind of agreed on that. It was an interesting mixture, and he could kind of let that go completely.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, from a perspective of a science teacher, how could we get insight into that phenomenon? We'd have to do science. We'd have to do a controlled study. It's very difficult to do controlled experiments with people. So, the notion that if X number of people pray for you, you will get better. God must hate amputees.
Let me just say one thing about the vaccines. And one thing that's not maybe well understood is that vaccines are not, the people who come out and say that vaccines should be a matter of individual choice are missing a very key point about how vaccines work. Almost every vaccine that we have is not 100% effective. So even people who get the vaccine may still have susceptibility. Maybe it's 2%. In some cases, it's more like 20% susceptibility still to that virus or bacteria. And the way they work is that if you get most people vaccinated, the presence of the bacteria in the population goes way down, and so we're not exposed to it. If more and more people become, consciously decide to be unvaccinated, you don't get that, what's called herd immunity. And so without that, even I, who've been responsible and gotten the vaccine, have still that 20% chance of getting sick. And I don't want that. It is hurting me that you don't vaccinate your children. And because of that spillover of risk, it's a public health issue, and it's a matter for governmental intervention to not just say, oh, well, do as you will. No, if you want to have your kids in public school, if you want to, do a lot of things, there should be laws that, hey, if you really want to come out of your house and interact with other people, you got to get your vaccine so that you are one of those people who are contributing to the herd immunity. And with that, I'm going to close this meeting.